But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. This I did.
Well, after that copyright scare I went through with Uncharted 2, let's avoid that for this review, shall we? Uncharted 1 and 2 were massive successes, and that was something the PlayStation 3 desperately needed. Unfortunately, Uncharted 3 suffers from a major flaw. I'll get more into it later, but the development team fully admitted they designed the set pieces of the game first, and hoped that a plot would follow, and that causes Uncharted 3 to feel really disjointed, especially with the one segment that the team was very proud of, unfortunately. But we'll get into it. Anyway, spoiler warning for the story here, we're not going to go too deep into the development history, as I feel we've said all that needs to be said. So the plot of Uncharted 3 opens with Nate and Sully in a bar, dressed for the occasion. It reminds me of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where we see Indy in an environment he's never been in. They're seeing a man named Talbot who is interested in purchasing Nate's ring. That ring is suddenly very valuable. I mean, it always was. I guess it's a good thing that Drake didn't leave it by Francis Drake's corpse in the first game. But unfortunately, but not surprisingly, it turns out to be a hoax and a bar fight breaks out. Nate and Sully eventually get out but are found by Charlie Cutter, where we meet our main villain Morrow, who is, well, I'll get into her later.
Give me that back.
Cutter!
Oh no. Oh.
Shut up! You fool!
Oh, you're bloody welcome, Your Majesty.
Marlowe, we have to get you out of here.
Oh, come on, they're a right pair of arseholes. What?
Yeah, like I believe you're going to kill off the main characters at the beginning of the game. From there, the story segues into a flashback with young Nathan Drake and how he met Sully. We see that Nate was pretty much a thief when he was a child, a young orphan with that being his only way to survive. Kinda like Aladdin. The game takes the time to establish Nate and Sully's relationship, even though it seems like it happens a lot earlier than Uncharted 1 would indicate. Retroactive continuity does wonders, folks. But it's not necessarily a bad retcon either. Also shows how Nate got Francis Drake's ring. Swiped it from a museum. Indiana Jones would be ashamed. We get a good characterization line from Morrow here.
Catherine!
Who do you think you are, boy? You're nothing but a filthy, cast-off little beggar. You're not fit to touch these objects.
Yeah, that sets the tone for her quite nicely. She orders her men to kill the boy, but Sully defends Nate. What I do like about the scene is the establishment of Nate and Sully's partnership, and how Sully became that father figure to Nate since he never really had one. It goes to show how the two came to trust each other. After the last game didn't really use much of the ring, this game uses the ring as the most important plot MacGuffin. Uncharted really works best when it's focusing on the character building because I love these characters, and that's where Amy Hennig's writing really shines.
I see great things in our future, kid. Great things.
Anyway, back to the present where it turns out that Nate and Sully aren't dead and Charlie is really on their side. It's a good way to make Charlie likable.
Finally flushed him out.
And now we just fall him back to that hole.
You do realize you make everything sound dirty.
I do?
Also, Charlie is claustrophobic, which is something his actor Graham McTavish decided to throw in because he thought it'd be funny. Sure, actors and actresses can do great things when they throw it in. So anyway, they meet up with Chloe and she's as feisty as ever and I just love her. So the group runs into Marlowe and they retrieve T.A. Lawrence's notebook which tells the location of the next MacGuffin. Like an Indiana Jones film. I love Indy. Mostly. But yeah, it's exactly like that. Nate and Sully decide to split up from Chloe and Charlie because of the locations. Sure, why not? It's like how Fred from Scooby-Doo always says, "Let's split up, gang." Even though it doesn't really make much sense to do when there's a monster chasing you. Anyway, while Charlie and Chloe are doing whatever, I guess the writers just wanted more Nate and Sully time. That came out wrong. So Nate and Sully go to Eastern France and find another half of a Talbot. But Talbot, who serves as this game's "I really hate that henchman guy," steals it from them. Yeah, each plot in Uncharted follows similar beats. Nate has the dragon to the big bad, who he has more of a personal connection with, and the big bad is someone who barely takes action, with the exception of Lazarevich. This whole section is just, we need to have Nate go to France for a bit and be separated from the group. Let's just do it. Also, a fire breaks out because I guess Naughty Dog just wanted to do a fire scene. More on that when we get to the filler ship. So Nate and Sully go back to Syria and meet up with Chloe and Cutter, who at the very least get information containing to the fetch quest, so it's not like it's a case of the main characters do everything. Marlowe is the head of an order dating back 4 centuries. Fascinating. During this time, the story actually starts going somewhere as Cutter gets shot with a dart that makes him hallucinogenic and makes him extremely paranoid, such as where he tries to strangle Nate to death, and Sully is given interesting characterization where he shows he was willing to shoot Charlie to save Nate.
You weren't. You weren't gonna shoot me, were you, mate?
Like a rabid dog.
Basically, it's a way to create conflict within the group, but Charlie gets to make his choice when he decides to save Nate. Although he manages to shoot Talbot, he breaks his leg in the process, which means that he and Chloe have to sit out the rest of the game. The real life reason for this was because his actor Graham McTavish got a role in The Hobbit, so he had to leave the game. And look how that turned out!
That was too close.
So Sully decides to call Elena. It turns out that Nate and Elena were married but have since separated. I guess both couldn't put their careers before their marriage. Instantly, I want to know more about this because Nate and Elena have good chemistry. But every time the game tries to focus on the plot about Francis Drake, it starts to lose me because of how disjointed this is. And we're about to see why as we're approaching the filler ship section. Talbot is also there. He's like everywhere. He's like Mr. X in Nemesis. He never leaves you alone. Basically what happens here, the trio finds the underground tomb, of course, but Nate gets hit with a hallucinogenic dart. After that, randomly starts chasing Talbot to find Sully, who is supposedly missing. Then Nate gets kidnapped and finds himself on a cruise ship where the main plot completely stops so Nate can have this adventure on a cruise ship that just feels totally inconsequential to the story. Then he ends up back on shore and meets Elaine so the plot can resume moving. This is the big problem with Uncharted 3's story. Naughty Dog fully admitted they wrote the set pieces of the game first and wrote the plot around them rather than writing the plot first. You see, in Uncharted 1 and 2, the set pieces flew naturally from point to point. But here, we need Nate to go on a cruise ship because we designed it first, so it's to a cruise ship he goes. But the whole thing feels like filler. And then he finds his way back to shore, luckily, I might add. So after some good chemistry between Nate and Elena, they find their way on the plane so Nate can get to where Sully is. Nate gets on the plane, ends up in the desert, but at least this doesn't feel like filler. Nate meets up with Ramas, who I enjoy because he's awesome, and they team up to rescue Sully in a sequence that reminds me of Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. But that means that after all that meandering, we are finally moving forward with the plot. Yeah, we'll stop there. As you can tell, I find the story to be awfully disjointed. Characters move from place to place depending on the plot, traveling here to there, padding, filler, pacing, problems galore. Yeah, this is probably the weakest story in the entire Uncharted series. I start to notice the character dynamics are the same, but yet what keeps me going is that the chemistry between the leads is as good as ever. It's a shame that Cutter got taken out of the story. I would have been interested to see where they would have gone with him. It's the little pieces of Nate's life from Uncharted 2 and 3 that I find interesting, such as him being married to Elena, but yet we only get little pieces of it. Less is more, you could say, but I don't know. But Uncharted 3 does stick the landing, which I will get to in the end. The graphics are the best Uncharted has seen yet. The spectacle of these games is truly amazing. As much as I think the filler ship is, well, a filler, I admit it's an amazing technical accomplishment. The water effects are so good. The voice acting is again top-notch. Nolan North and company all shine as these characters. Like I said, I love the character relationships in Uncharted. That's where the writing really shines. Now for the gameplay. Well, Naughty Dog has definitely continued to redefine the gameplay. The opening of the game really plays out like a Batman Arkham game with the focus on hand-to-hand combat. I can do so much more than I could before. I get the feeling this sequence really plays out like this because ND wanted to show off all the improvements made to the combat. I especially love when Drake hits the big guy. Yeah, that's gotta hurt. One thing I also noticed is that this time when Drake knocks somebody out with a punch, he can grab their gun while it's in the air. Nice touch. As for the young Nathan Drake segments, well, they're mostly just tour around, follow this guy, make sure you don't get caught. If you do die during these parts, the camera will cut away. I guess it's something they don't want to show. That's very controversial in video games. Obviously, young Drake isn't as good as his adult self, so he has to use leverage and trickery to avoid his pursuers. It's a trick that he still uses today. Always gotta improvise. If I was to sum up Uncharted's climbing and gunplay, it'd be refinement. Everything has been refined to near perfection. The game gives you plenty of options for what to do with the gunplay. I personally like to stick with the assault rifles with snipers as they allow you to zoom in on your target. Of course, you can take the stealth option whenever that applies. Of course, when it comes time to solve puzzles or ladders, you have to do all the work, because of course you do. Like the first two, there's a lot of treasures for you to find. I didn't go out of my way to get them, but they're there if you want 100% completion. I will say this about the puzzles. They are creative, and they are nothing you can't figure out on your own. I love how Nate's journal has the solution to everything he ever encounters. That's gotta be really convenient. Although this one about finding the right gears took quite a bit to figure out. Fortunately, your allies do tell you when you are doing something wrong. I like puzzle solving that rewards ingenuity. Of course, it has to have the scene where you are hallucinating on everything. There's not much to really say about the segment. You basically just run forward, chase Talbot, and well, I just seriously wonder what Elena is doing during all this. Yeah, that's just seemed like really unfortunate footwork. I guess I just wanted an excuse to have a reason for how Nate ends up at sea all of a sudden. Yeah, Nate must fight his way out of some pirates that just happen to be in the story all of a sudden. It's an excuse so that we can have another melee fight scene. This set piece where Nate has to swim across the water to get the different ships is so annoying because the swimming controls are so awkward. It's hard to describe without actually playing it. What I will say about the cruise ship is that it's the set piece that Naughty Dog went all out on. It has everything, climbing, fighting, all set to the amazing background. Also, I do love how Nate can set a grenade on an armored thug and quickly run away before it goes off. Adds variety to the combat. And then you go inside and it's a massive gunfight. Then Nate causes the whole ship to sink. I guess that makes sense. It's like Indiana Jones, make it up as you go. Even with the ship sinking, everyone still tries to shoot you. Yeah, sure, why not? Once the ship fills up, you have to swim or else you will drown. There's not as much of a warning like in Sonic, you have to be quick about it. So it takes a few tries to get right. Then he climbs doors, ends up on a chandelier. It all looks cool, but like I said, it feels like filler. Then of course Nate catches onto a plane, and this is a little more justified as because you're trying to find Sully. The airplane sequence is short, but it leads into the desert. I both love and hate this segment. On the positive side, it shows Nate's determination despite how tedious it is to walk through the desert. I get that that's probably the intention. I would never want to be lost in a desert, but yet, like any good hero, Nate won't give up. Walking is the quintessential semi-cutscene, so things can happen while you control the character. One thing I will say, I like the solution to take down a tank by destroying the pillars. It's really clever, and I applaud you, game, for that. I also love the horse riding segments. It's one of the greatest ways of traveling in a video game. Even though you're using it to get to moving vehicles, I think the horse controls nicely, and thankfully it's invulnerable to enemy fire. Nice, shooting is much better when you're behind cover as you can aim your shots, as I've noticed. So now we're about to enter the final area of the game, so the rest of the video will be filled with big spoilers, so keep that in mind. So Nate and Sully enter Ubar, standard final Uncharted area. It looks beautiful and the graphics really bring it out, but then this happens.
Now that's a hell of a thing. What?
No. No.
So now Nate is furious and goes into a rage. The section is really tense and exhilarating, but yet it doesn't really match up with how he reacted in Uncharted 1 where he seemed angry but still ran for his life. Granted, he didn't have a weapon on him at the time, and I imagine they hadn't yet decided just how far back Nate and Sully's relationship went. The scene keeps changing. I guess a way to tie everything together from the beginning. Eventually Sully shows up alive and well.
That real enough for you? Don't ever point a gun at me again.
I swear, they always make it seem like this will be the game to kill Sully off, but they don't do it. Here's the thing, it's something people don't understand. You don't have to kill a character to end their story. So Nate and Sully find Marlowe, and the true reason for Francis Drake's quest becomes apparent. He knew what he was going to bring about with the water, and thus abandoned the quest, but Marlowe doesn't care. So Nate does what he does best: shoot first, ask questions later.
We've got to go! Run!
Ain't that always the way in a video game? So begins the final section of the game, once again your standard escape from collapsing structure. There's no timed mechanic to it, but it does create a sense of danger. Some things in life are just not meant to be explained. So Nate and Sully make their way out, but run into Marlowe and Talbot. Fortunately, the ground below them breaks, but Marlowe is caught in the quicksand.
Drake? Are you worthy of the name? Earn this, as Francis earned it from Elizabeth. Prove your greatness.
I got nothing to prove.
But Nate's a good guy and tries to save Marlowe anyway, because it really wouldn't have looked right if he had left her to die. But he can't get her out and she sinks. Really horrible way to go. But as Nate and Sully make their way out, Talbot makes one last move to kill Drake. It's not really a final boss per se, more of a scripted encounters. All you have to do is press the right buttons to make sure you don't die. It's not quite as good as the encounter with Lazarevich, but it gets the job done. But then Nate has to climb all the way back up. It creates much more tension because you know Sully is losing. A fitting fate for that jerk. So Nate and Sully make it out in time thanks to some help, and the day is won, though the ring is lost. Unfortunate, but hey, you can't fault anyone for trying. That being said, the final moments with Nate and Sully talking are good, as Sully admits he sees Nate as the son he never had.
Here's the thing, kid. We don't get to choose how we start in this life. Real greatness, it's what you do with the hand you dealt.
So Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception is a polished game, but also a disjointed mess. I don't recommend starting here. I would say play the series in order, but they really needed to plan out the story before they did the set pieces. Maybe they'll learn that for next time. I'm doing either Golden Abyss or Uncharted 4 when we come back to this, so join me then.
No way. It's not as nice as the one you two wrecked 4 years ago, but it'll do. Come on. Let's see if I can remember how to fly the goddamn thing.
Hey, this has parachutes, right?
Oh, yeah. 3.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit that bell, like, and subscribe button. If you want updates, follow me on Twitter. Join my Discord or follow me on Twitter provided in the description. See you next time.